Breaking tonight, the numbers just confirmed what Ottawa suspected all along. When crisis hit, one group of automakers stayed, the other walked away. And the pattern reveals exactly which countries treat Canada as a partner versus which see it as convenient. Everyone's asking the same question: who stayed committed to Canadian manufacturing when times got tough? The answer isn't what Detroit expected, and it validates every single argument Mark Carney made about trade diversification. Here's what nobody saw coming. Tensions are rising across North American auto manufacturing tonight. Between 2016 and 2025, Canada lost nearly half its vehicle production capacity. Financial analysts assumed the decline hit everyone equally. Industry observers expected all automakers to scale back proportionally. They were all utterly incorrect. The Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing just released data that splits the auto industry into two completely different stories. One group of companies cut Canadian production by more than half. Another group maintained their commitment, actually increased their share, and kept hiring even as markets fluctuated. Want to guess which companies stayed and which left? The companies that reduced their Canadian footprint dramatically and consistently. Ford, Stellantis, General Motors, the Detroit Three, all headquartered in the United States. The companies that maintained production, expanded their workforce share, and treated Canada as essential to their North American strategy. Honda and Toyota, both headquartered in Japan. The contrast isn't subtle. In 2016, the Detroit Three produced 56% of vehicles assembled in Canada. By 2025, that figure collapsed to 23%. In the exact same timeframe, Honda and Toyota's share surged from 44% to 77%. Translation: when American automakers needed flexibility, they pulled back from Canada. When Japanese automakers faced the same market pressures, they doubled down on their Canadian operations. And what happened to employment tells the same story even more clearly. Dear viewers, between 2015 and 2024, something extraordinary happened in Canadian auto manufacturing. The companies everyone assumed were permanent fixtures started treating Canadian workers as optional. The companies operating from across the Pacific treated those same workers as essential. In 2015, jobs at Detroit Three assembly plants accounted for 60% of all Canadian auto employment. By 2024, that figure dropped to 38%. Jobs with Honda and Toyota climbed above 60% in the same period. This isn't about one bad quarter or temporary market adjustment. This is about sustained strategic decisions by different companies operating under identical economic conditions. Brendan Sweeney, managing director of the Trillium Network, described the pattern plainly. There's just this general long-term move away from Canada from US-based automakers. General, long-term, sustained. The kind of retreat that happens when a company's strategic priorities place another country first and Canada somewhere down the list. And the specific decisions prove exactly that. GM announced it would end production of Bright Drop electric delivery vans at its Ingersoll, Ontario plant, then cut a shift at its Oshawa facility, eliminating jobs for 1,200 auto workers throughout the supply chain. Stellantis shut down its Brampton plant and initially cut a shift in Windsor before reversing course under political pressure. Ford closed its Oakville plant for retooling. Every decision pointed the same direction. When Detroit Three executives faced choices, Canadian operations became the variable they adjusted, the commitment they reduced, the investment they postponed. Now compare that to Honda and Toyota. The Honda Civic, assembled in Canada, remains one of the most popular vehicles in North America. Toyota's RAV4, also built in Canadian facilities, dominates its segment. Both companies maintained production levels, kept hiring, and treated their Canadian operations as integral to their continental strategy rather than as contingent on quarterly fluctuations. What's the difference? Strategic philosophy. American automakers operate with a home market bias. When pressure builds, they protect Detroit, protect American jobs, protect the political constituencies that matter to their Washington relationships. Canadian operations become expendable. Japanese automakers operate without that geographic anchor pulling decisions toward one country. Their Canadian plants compete on performance, efficiency, product quality. When those plants deliver, Tokyo keeps investing. When market conditions shift, executives don't instinctively pull back from Canada to protect some other national priority. This is the exact dynamic Mark Carney identified when he talked about trade diversification and reliable partnerships. Countries don't need more trade with partners who treat them as optional. They need trade with partners who see mutual benefit who invest during uncertainty, who don't abandon commitments the moment political winds shift in their home market. Detroit 3 executives would probably argue they face different competitive pressures, different labor costs, different regulatory environments. All true, but Honda and Toyota faced those exact same conditions and reached completely opposite conclusions about Canada's value. The data doesn't lie. One group stayed, one group left. And the group that stayed operates from a country that doesn't share a border with Canada, doesn't have cultural assumptions about Canadian dependence, doesn't take Canadian partnership for granted. Now here's where this gets politically significant. Donald Trump just imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian-made vehicles, devastating an industry already under pressure. But Sweeney from the Trillium Network made a crucial point. US-based automakers were already decreasing their production here, making the trade war just the latest hurdle for the industry. The latest hurdle, not the cause. The continuation of a pattern that started long before Trump announced tariffs, long before current trade tensions, long before anyone was talking about reshoring or economic nationalism. This has been 25 years in the making, Sweeney said. 25 years of American automakers incrementally reducing their Canadian commitment. 25 years of strategic decisions that prioritized American facilities over Canadian plants. 25 years of exactly the behavior Carney warned about when he talked about over-dependence on unreliable partners. And during those same 25 years, Japanese automakers maintained their Canadian presence, invested in new models, expanded employment, and treated Canada as essential rather than contingent. That's not coincidence. That's strategic culture. Brian Kingston, president of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, pushed back on the Trillium report. He argued it focused too narrowly on vehicle production and missed Detroit 3 contributions to research and development, to battery plants, to parts manufacturing. Maybe. But when a company cuts 1,200 jobs at its assembly plant while pointing to future investments in battery technology, workers notice which commitment materialized and which remained aspirational. When Stellantis pauses retooling at its Brampton facility while Japanese competitors maintain consistent production, the contrast becomes unavoidable. Actions reveal priorities. Detroit 3 actions revealed that Canadian manufacturing wasn't the priority. Here's what makes this moment particularly significant. Ottawa is expected to release its automotive strategy this month. Sweeney recommended a simple principal reward companies that have shown commitment to Canada. Let's show some commitment back to them, he said. Flavio Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, agreed. Extend incentives to all companies willing to invest in and produce cars in Canada. The President of the United States is using a stick, so let's find at least a carrot here and put it into the mix. Translation: stop treating all automakers the same when they don't behave the same. Stop assuming American companies deserve Canadian support when Japanese companies demonstrated superior commitment. Stop subsidizing retreat and start rewarding reliability. This is Carney's trade diversification thesis in its purest form. Canada doesn't need partners who show up when times are good and disappear when markets tighten. It needs partners who see long-term mutual benefit, who invest through cycles, who treat Canadian workers and facilities as essential rather than expendable. The Detroit 3 had every opportunity to maintain their Canadian operations. They chose differently. Honda and Toyota had every excuse to reduce their Canadian footprint. They chose commitment instead. That choice matters. That choice reveals which partnerships Canada should prioritize, which relationships deserve government support, which companies merit the incentives Ottawa is considering. And when Trump's tariffs hit, the pattern became even clearer. American automakers were already pulling back from Canada before tariffs provided political cover. Japanese automakers stayed committed even as tariffs made their Canadian operations more expensive. Reliability under pressure, that's the test of partnership. American automakers failed it. Japanese automakers passed it. And the data confirms exactly what Carney argued about diversification away from partners who see Canada as optional. Dear viewers, this isn't about demonizing American companies or celebrating Japanese superiority. This is about recognizing patterns, learning from behavior, and making strategic decisions based on evidence rather than assumptions. For decades, Canadian policy treated proximity to the United States as automatically advantageous. American companies got preferential consideration, favorable terms, assumptions of reliable partnership based on geography and cultural similarity. The auto manufacturing data demolishes that assumption. The companies that stayed weren't the ones closest to Canada geographically. They were the ones committed to Canada strategically. The companies that left weren't distant or unfamiliar. They were literally next door, operating from Detroit, claiming special relationship status while cutting Canadian jobs and reducing Canadian production. Geography doesn't determine reliability. Strategic culture does. Japanese automakers operate with a different philosophy. They invest in markets based on performance, maintain commitments through cycles, and don't instinctively retreat to protect home market political constituencies. That culture produced sustained Canadian investment even as American competitors pulled back. This is the lesson Ottawa needs to absorb completely. Trade diversification isn't about rejecting American partnership. It's about refusing to assume American partnership is automatically superior, automatically reliable, automatically deserving of preferential treatment, regardless of actual behavior. When Ottawa releases its automotive strategy this month, the data provides a clear guide. Reward companies that stayed. Incentivize commitment. Make reliability the metric rather than proximity or historical relationship or vague cultural assumptions. Honda and Toyota earned Canadian support through sustained investment. Detroit 3 lost that privilege through sustained retreat. Policy should reflect that reality, and what this reveals about broader trade strategy matters beyond automotive manufacturing. Carney's diversification thesis applies to every sector where Canada currently overdepends on American partnership. Energy, agriculture, technology, defense procurement. In each area, Canadian policy should evaluate reliability based on behavior rather than geography, should reward commitment rather than assume it, should diversify toward partners who demonstrate long-term strategic consistency. The auto manufacturing data proves the approach works. Japan is further from Canada than the United States. Japanese automakers face higher logistics costs, longer supply chains, different time zones, language barriers. Yet they maintained Canadian commitment while American companies next door pulled back. Distance doesn't determine reliability. Neither does cultural similarity. Strategic partnership culture does. And countries that operate without instinctive home market bias prove more reliable than those who treat partnership as contingent on domestic political convenience. That's the lesson. That's what the numbers confirm. That's what Carney understood about trade diversification and reliable partnerships. Canada's automotive future depends on learning this lesson completely. Stop subsidizing companies that treat Canadian workers as expendable. Start rewarding companies that demonstrate sustained commitment. Stop assuming American partnership is automatically superior. Start evaluating every relationship based on actual behavior under actual pressure. The Detroit 3 made their choice. Honda and Toyota made theirs. The data shows which choice served Canadian workers, Canadian manufacturing, Canadian economic interests. Ottawa's automotive strategy should reflect that reality. And if it does, Canada gets what Carney promised: partnerships based on mutual respect, sustained investment, and reliable commitment rather than geographic proximity and convenient assumptions. The companies leaving Canada are American. The companies staying genuinely invest in Canada. That pattern isn't accident. That pattern is strategy revealing itself through sustained behavior. And when strategy reveals itself this clearly, policy should respond decisively. Reward reliability, diversify partnerships, learn from the data. That's how Canada transitions from dependence to resilience. That's how Carney's vision becomes Canadian reality. And that's exactly what tonight's numbers confirm beyond any doubt. The choice is Ottawa's. The evidence is overwhelming. And the path forward validates everything Carney argued about: trade diversification, reliable partners, and refusing to accept partnership that treats Canada as optional.